You won't find this story in the Gospel of Mark or Matthew or Luke, but it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Joanna is in the kitchen gutting fish when she hears James stumble through the door. Uh-oh, she thinks. He's home early. Bad news. A storm on the lake? She looks to the north. No, clear skies today. Perhaps a dearth of fish. She sighs a deep sigh, wipes her hand on a rag, and prepares herself for one of James' notorious sulks. She looks up, and there is James, his great fisherman's bulk filling the space of the entrance to the kitchen. But he isn't sulking. Far from it, he's grinning, and his deep brown eyes, typically so pensive, are dancing. There seems to be a great sense of urgency in the air. So what is all this excitement about? Joanna, he says, I've met a rabbi. I see. He's not like any rabbi I've ever met. He cares about people, Joanna. He cares about fishermen, our families. He talks about the kingdom of heaven, a place where the poor are cherished. It's real, Joanna, this kingdom. It's real. This man is a prophet, Joanna. You know, all these hours that you and I have spent talking about the Messiah, what he would do, what he would say, and this man, Jesus, is as close to the Messiah as it gets. He has so much to teach me, and I want to follow him. Well, Joanna was beginning to resent all this enthusiasm. When was the last time he'd been enthusiastic about her? Confused, she sighs and places her fishy hand on her childbearing hip. What do you mean, follow him? You're a fisherman. Follow him. Where? All over Palestine, to learn from him, to teach others about the kingdom, to turn the world upside down. You know I've always wanted to teach, Joanna. He said we'd be on the road for about 3 years. Joanna blinks. This conversation is getting wilder by the minute. 3 years. She glares at Andrew's nervous face. 3 years! She bellows, loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. And who will fish for me, and who will feed your 5 children? Well, I've thought about that, Joanna. There's Dad. I know he's kind of old. He's over 40. But he's still a good fisherman. And there's Nathan, our hired hand. He has no family. He would be a great asset. He could move in for a while. 3 years. For once in her life, Joanna is at a loss for words. What can she do? What can she say? When push comes to shove, it's still a man's world. What finally emerges from her mouth are the most practical words she can think of. Don't forget to pack your underwear. I don't even know if they had underwear then. I don't know. Then, in a gesture of defiance, or perhaps out of a sudden desire to be alone, she turns on her heel, marches into the kitchen, and goes back to gutting her fish. End of story. Or maybe just the beginning. So Bruce just read to us the very powerful narrative, the call of the disciples, specifically the call of the fishermen. This story is found in the Gospel of Mark and Matthew. The image of Jesus addressing Simon, Andrew, James, and John as they cast or mend their nets has been etched in our minds. It's found its way into every Sunday school text and thousands of stained glass windows. What this narrative has to say to us is profound. It's helpful to know a few things about St. Mark and the way that he writes. So most of you know that Mark's was the first gospel to be written, and it's the shortest. According to Mark, the timeline of Jesus' life moves in quick succession. He loves the word immediately. He uses it twice as often as Matthew does. Only a minister would notice these things. It's important to Mark that we understand the urgent nature of Jesus' ministry and the strength and the power that Jesus possesses, which enables things to happen quickly. And so according to Mark, the four fishermen, Simon, Andrew, James, John, immediately left their nets to follow Christ. But this abrupt departure leaves many questions unanswered. And I know I'm not the first person to wonder about the families that the fishermen leave behind, apparently left in the lurch to carry on regardless. However, for all of you who have wondered, here's a bit of good news. A number of biblical scholars are adamant that the disciples did not, in fact, leave their families behind. Some scholars will argue that in keeping with the culture of that day, the disciples would have brought their families along for the journey with Jesus. So we have Jesus, the 12 disciples, and their families, quite an entourage. And eventually others would join this ragtag team. Among them, women who Luke mentions in his gospel: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, wife of Chuza, Susanna, and other women of means who acted as benefactors of Jesus. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that the male disciples brought their families along for the ride. At least the families were not torn apart, but still, this was a risk, to leave the comfort of four walls, to leave extended family behind, to leave a job behind, not knowing how they would provide for themselves. This was a substantial risk. As difficult as it is for us to imagine, people are still taking risks in the name of Jesus, still experiencing the call, still rising to the challenge despite the risks. I have a friend named Lou, who's now retired, but while she was working in a factory, she experienced a calling so strong that she would bank her vacation days and twice a year pack her bags and head to a village in Guatemala. The charity she helped to found was aptly named Guatemala Hope and supports the basic needs of the folks in an impoverished village. But this is not about handouts. It's about Canadians and Guatemalans working together to make a community stronger, healthier, and better educated. It's about ennobling others, creating leaders, and encouraging self-sufficiency. I'm full of admiration for Lou, who has invested such time, energy, and financial resources. Now retired and in her 60s, she experiences the freedom and the joy of throwing even more energy into her calling. I also want to tell you about a woman named Margaret Ann and her husband, Alan. They discerned a call some 40 years ago to serve the United Church as overseas personnel in Japan. Together, they left their jobs, packed up their 2 kids, and embarked on a grand adventure, prepared to embrace the great unknown. They worked alongside others in Japan, engaging in practical projects, enabling and empowering others. While Alan and Margaret Ann responded to the invitation to go to Japan, when Lou struck out and journeyed to Guatemala, They were already disciples of Christ. But in the process of receiving and responding to the call, they experienced a transformation. Just like the fishermen, Simon and Andrew, James and John, they experienced within the sense that their deep hunger for fulfillment was about to be met. So what about you? What about me? At this time, we may not be called to cross the Pacific or the Atlantic. But let's be clear. While discipleship often involves a physical journey, it is most importantly a journey of the heart. So what does discipleship mean to you? I, like the fishermen, have been invited to follow Jesus. I am a disciple. I am a disciple. Now, if this wondrous gift, this mighty calling, doesn't stir the blood in our veins, then maybe we don't really understand what it's all about. My prayer today is this: may you and I, in the spirit of Simon, Andrew, James, and John, experience the thrill of the calling. May we rediscover what it means to be disciples. May we heed the invitation to rise and follow. May we know what it means to serve with energy, conviction, and joy. May it be so.